I have a question I want to ask you.
What's that?
In your opinion, where is perception perceived?
What's perception to you?
The way you choose to view something.
Okay. So perspective, interpretation?
Mm-hmm.
So where does perspective or interpretation take place? We have the prana or chi body inside this body. Mm-hmm. And it's like a Russian doll. There's bodies within bodies. So inside that, there's the emotional body. The more inward a particular body is, it controls the outer. The inner controls the outer. So that little thing, what is not in you cannot appear outside. Mm-hmm. The deeper in the layers, the deeper inward we go, the closer we are to the actual source, the source of control, which is what controls everything that we see, including all perspectives. Mm-hmm. So on the outside, you picture it like a sphere, like the earth. On the outside, there's all these little people running around the earth. But the core consciousness of Gaia in the center is one mind. And all these little thoughts, these people who consider themselves separate and individual, it's just an illusion that they're believing. It's actually the one mind of Gaia thinking these thoughts. So this idea that we are a natural enemy of Gaia who's threatening her, these are Gaia's thoughts that manifest our perspectives. And similarly, Gaia is a manifestation of the consciousness of the sun. So in our solar system, the planets are the thoughts of the sun. And the perspectives are the orbits and the relationships and the life story and destiny of the planets comes from the consciousness of the center of the sun. And then our sun mm-hmm. revolves around the center of our galaxy. And every galaxy has a center, a supermassive black hole. And that center, that mysterious event horizon of a black hole, we can't wrap our minds around. It's not material, it's not relative. Everything, space-time itself is warped into it. And without space-time, there is no relativity. So this is like mind-blowing. This center sun, invisible sun, like Sting's song, mm-hmm. has to be an invisible sun. This invisible sun around which our entire galaxy revolves creates your perspective, my perspective. We're not free in that regard until we realize ourselves as the central sun.
And that's what I was going to ask you next is that where you came up with the idea that there's not any free will?
I got it from Ramana Maharshi. You know, looking for answers, I read a lot of his writings, and so I took a lot of it on faith initially, but kind of, I guess we're all in this process of when we turn to a guide or a teacher, they say something that like clears up a lot of the things we've been wondering about, and then all of a sudden things start to kind of click in and make sense. Mm-hmm. And so that's what was happening with me. I was reading his statements about prarabdha karma and wondering what that was and how that works, and just contemplating the interconnectedness. Like Alan Watts says that no wave of the ocean is independently acting. Mm-hmm. Even though it may think and feel it is, the entire ocean created it to think and feel that way. So our spiritual journey is not our own. This is the journey of Gaia. This is the journey of the planet. And greater than that is the journey of the central sun. And greater than that, the galaxies are revolving around an even bigger center. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like a fractal. It's infinite. And we keep going infinitely toward the center forever. We're always here. But nothing is independent. It's all interconnected. So everything is kind of like, in the Bhagavad Gita it says, as though seated on a machine, Krishna is doing all of it. We're like puppets. Mm-hmm. And it's just like in a lucid dream, okay? Different layers of lucidity. When you are not even in any layer of lucidity, you're just in the delusion, in the dreaming at night. I am this particular character, and the feeling of that state of consciousness is that you are making these choices, that you are separate from those others out there, that you are reacting to the stuff you're presented with. Then as you go to a higher layer of lucidity, you start to own those choices, and you realize this is my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not separate from this. I am communicating with my own self. And so that expands your consciousness, your awareness. Instead of just me, it's my family. Instead of my family, it's my community, it's my world. And so we take down those walls of separation. And there's a byproduct, a natural experience of love, which is like a broth that everything moves in. And so there's a natural experience of that, and a recognition. You meet another conscious being, this is me, and we exist in love. And so the day-to-day experience of that is different from being in a lower level of lucidity where you are battling against your own creations and thinking you're a victim or something, and fearing what might happen to you from them.
Right. But I think it's more interesting to have some of those puppet strings snipped to kind of see where that character would go without having full control over it. Does that make any sense?
Can you say that a different way?
If you bring it down to a simpler level, like you're just a higher self, and you're looking down at, I don't want to say looking down, you're not looking down, but you're looking at this character.
Let's just put it in the dream metaphor, like dreaming at night.
Mm-hmm.
So is it better to not be lucid so that you can experience yourself as a separate being?
I'm finding that I am less interested in lucid dreaming than what I used to be, because I get so much more out of regular dreams.
Okay. And so what were you asking?
Like when we were talking about free will, how there basically isn't any.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be more interesting
to believe in free will?
No, just to, rather than know what's going to happen,
So most of our lives, our experience has been one of not knowing. And we don't really have to try to lose ourselves in the dream. That's the nature of the dream, is to make us forget. That's how we set it up. So we don't have to try to not be lucid, because we live in a culture that has raised us to not be lucid. We're surrounded by other people who are not lucid. And so there's an incredible amount of peer pressure from family, from friends, to interact and deal with the world in the normal way. Normal means not bad, from French. So what's not bad is to conform to the way that the people around us do it. And if we don't have to try to not enter lucidity. That's just the usual case. And what happens is that we start to notice that the others, many of them, are not enjoying their dream experience. That there's an incredible amount of vicious, brutal behavior and suffering. Genocide in Darfur, people's families being murdered in front of them, people being raped in many, many countries around the world, people watching their babies starve in their arms because they don't have enough food. And so the question really is, isn't it more fun to be dismembered by a murderous pedophile? Isn't it more fun to have the genocide? Isn't it more fun to have all of this war and destruction and hate and fear? But from the perspective of somebody who feels like these are your own children, when we ask ourselves, well, if your child were terrified and screaming and hurting and frightened, wouldn't you feel like you wanted to relieve that? And so in this broth of love where we are not others, and we can't just turn our back and go on pursuing our lust and greed, the only way to truly help others is to first the person who would be doing the helping is to heal the physician.
Right.
And so doing it is not necessarily a nihilistic act of escape. It can be a purification for the sake of being strong enough to reach out to those terrified children and say, hey, you're dreaming. Relax. Don't be afraid. When you're afraid, you make it worse. The spikes come into the neck.
Yeah.
Shh.
You said something to me yesterday that really resonated, and I wanted to ask you if you would talk about that. You mentioned something about thrill seekers, kind of like me.
Mm-hmm.
How there's something more important than survival.
Yeah. So we look at the human animal, and when it faces death, it becomes terrified. Even Ram Dass, a respected spiritual teacher who devoted his career to the subject of aging and dying. Mm-hmm. He's the authority and figured, he's always focusing on awareness and teaching other people to do that. When he had his massive stroke a few years ago, was panicked, horrified, terrified. The human animal fears destruction. And when we see a lot of these fears that cause us to be really uncool to each other, how we need to separate ourselves and protect ourselves, which keeps us from experiencing that broth of love. Mm-hmm. And then out of that is born all kinds of fucked up shit, like the financial system and government system of our planet, mm-hmm. And the wars that it breeds. So the human animal is terrified of destruction. And because it wants to keep the murdering away, it goes out and murders to keep the bad ones away because of this fear. So it's fear acting out, creating more things to be afraid of. Mm-hmm. But it's not as simple as that. We're not merely bodies, because people go base jumping, do things that most people would be terrified to do, go parasailing. People go bungee jumping. People go hang gliding, jump out of planes. And it's more, I know some of these people, and it's more than just adrenaline junkiism, the thrill seeking. It's more than just a drug addiction. These are intelligent, strong people who are choosing to do something for the sake of that experience. And so there's values. The highest value is not life and death. And people will lay down their lives for the sake of their children, for the sake of a stranger. And the value of keeping destruction away and the value of surviving is not the highest value. What is the highest value? What do you think? You're the thrill seeker. Is it fun?
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out. I think it can be, more than one thing. Survival definitely wouldn't be at the top of the list.
Right. You think it would be pointless to live a life where nothing means anything, nothing matters, and I'm just going to lock myself in this closet and chant.
Yeah.
Home forever.
Mm-hmm.
To you, that's pointless.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's something more important.
Yeah.
And how can you describe that?
Not really, because it involves a lot of emotions and feelings and girly stuff.
So let's talk about emotions and feelings and girly stuff. What's wrong with that? Is it not spiritual?